There are a few things we love more on this channel than ridiculously big machines, and they don't get much bigger or more ridiculous than the FV4005, developed in the early Cold War as an ad hoc counter to Soviet heavy tanks. This beast touted a 183mm cannon, the largest ever fitted to a British tank, and yet, despite the fearsome destructive capabilities it possessed, it never progressed beyond the prototype stage, doomed to a fate as naught but an interesting footnote in the history of the Cold War. But why? Well, today we're going to answer that very question by giving you a comprehensive rundown on the performance and development history of this most impressive machine and seeing if it truly was ridiculous or if something else was responsible for its failure. So, let's get into it. The FV4005 was nothing if not enormous, measuring approximately 31 feet in length, 11.5 feet in width, and 9 feet in height. Despite its imposing stature, however, it was operated by a modest crew of 5, only one more than the Centurion upon which it was based. This included a commander, driver, gunner, and on account of its enormous gun, 2 loaders. Being based upon the Centurion also gave it surprisingly thin armor on its hull, only 3 inches thick on the front plating. Its new parts didn't fare much better either, with its enormous turret only being 0.55 inches at its thickest point. This was not necessarily a big issue, as it was designed to engage targets at extremely long ranges where the risk of counterfire was deemed to be pretty minimal. As for its firepower, it was armed with the mighty L4, a fully rifled cannon with a bore diameter of 7.2 inches. The gun alone weighed 3.7 tons, and it was optimized to fire a single type of ammunition, a high explosive squash head, or Hesh round. At 231 pounds, this round typically weighed more than the people loading it, this huge mass being made up of a 159-pound projectile and 73 pounds of casing and propellant. To put this into perspective, the Ordnance QF 20-pounder cannon fitted into the Centurion, on which the FV4005 was based, fired a round that typically weighed around 50 pounds. British naming conventions, weird we know 20 pounds here refers to the mass of the projectile and not the whole round for some reason. Just let me interrupt today's video to talk about our lovely sponsor today, and that would be Keeps. Now look, as you can tell, I know a thing or two about male pattern baldness. My hair ran for the hills a long time ago, and it's not coming back. However, I'm fairly confident that if Keeps had been there back in the day when things had just started getting smooth and shiny for me, it might have been a different story. Keeps is an online subscription service that makes it easy and more affordable for guys like me to treat male pattern baldness from the comfort of their own home. That's right, no inconvenient trips to the doctors or pharmacy that eats time out of your busy schedule. You order online and it will be delivered directly to your door at whatever time you deem convenient. And on top of that, it's affordable, typically half the cost of a traditional pharmacy. Keeps offers clinically proven treatments. According to studies, these treatments are 90% effective at treating hair loss and can increase hair growth by up to 35%. Plus, they have a 2-in-1 gel that's like a superhero for your hair. Most Keeps customers notice results within 6 months of starting treatments. And in addition to great treatments, Keeps also offers hair thickening shampoo, conditioner, and styling pomade, so you can help stop your hair loss and make your hair look good while doing it. Keeps has helped nearly 1 million men keep their hair, with over 4,500 5-star reviews from satisfied customers. Every delivery is non-branded, all in plain packaging, and deliveries are made in plain unbranded trucks, so no need to be embarrassed. It may be too late for me, but it's not too late for you. Halt the loss in its tracks before it's beyond hope and regrow, refresh, and reclaim your head. For a special offer, go to keeps.com/Simon or click the link in the description below. That's keeps.com/Simon. And now back to today's video. Power for this mighty beast came from a 650 horsepower Rolls-Royce Meteor petrol engine located at the rear of the vehicle. This engine allowed the FV4005 to achieve a power-to-weight ratio of approximately 9.6 horsepower a ton, and it gave a maximum speed of about 22 miles per hour on roads, around 10 miles an hour slower than the Centurion. Naturally, this is due to the extra weight of its much, much bigger cannon. This extra weight also made it a thirsty beast, able to just about squeeze 100 miles out of a 146-gallon fuel tank. This gave it an economy rating of a whopping 0.69 miles per gallon. The transmission was a conventional gearbox with 5 forward and 1 reverse gear. The suspension was a Horstman-style system, a clever setup which worked by utilizing coil springs and bell cranks to efficiently absorb and manage the forces exerted on the vehicle while traversing uneven terrain. In the Horstman suspension, the bell crank is connected to the wheel assembly and pivots around its mounting points when the wheel encounters an obstacle. This pivotal motion transfers the vertical displacement of the wheel to the coil spring, causing it to compress and absorb the impact. As the coil spring decompresses, it releases the stored energy and pushes the wheel assembly back down, maintaining consistent contact with the ground, resulting in, for the time, smooth and even ride. We know that the FV4005 was designed to counter Soviet heavy tanks such as the IS-3. So let's now take a moment to compare them. The IS-3 is a big boy in its own right, measuring 32.5 feet in length and 10.7 feet in width. In contrast, the FV4005 was slightly shorter and slightly wider, with dimensions of 31 feet in length and 11.5 feet in width. In terms of height, the FV4005 was taller, standing at 9 feet compared to the IS-3's 8 feet. The IS-3 also had significantly thicker armor than the FV4005, the latter having only 3 inches of armor on its hull and a mere 0.55 inches on its turret, compared to 6.2 inches on the hull and 9.8 inches on the turret of the former. However, this is not necessarily indicative of one type being better than the other, as they were designed for really different roles on the battlefield. The FV4005 was a tank destroyer, intended to sit at extreme range and pick off enemy armor, while the IS-3 was a heavy tank, designed to operate at closer ranges and take hits, as well as give them out. The engines of the two machines also differed. The IS-3 was powered by a V11 diesel engine, generating 520 horsepower and allowing for a top speed of 23 miles per hour. That's a mile an hour faster than the FV4005. But the real question is, could the FV4005 kill the IS-3, the very tank that it was designed to counter? And to answer that question, let's look at the penetration data for the L4 cannon, where we see that its Hesh round could penetrate 11.3 inches of armor at all ranges. Given the IS-3's maximum armor thickness of 9.8 inches on the turret and 6.2 inches, well, yes it could, rather easily. But that sparks another question. If the FV4005 was such a ferocious prospect on the battlefield, why did it never progress beyond the prototype stage? And to answer that, we need to do a deep dive into the history of this mighty machine, starting with its cannon. Development of the L4 cannon began in 1950, when it was realized that British heavy gun tanks of the day might not be up to the task of killing new Soviet heavy tanks such as the IS-3. To solve this problem, a formal requirement was issued for a cannon that could penetrate a 6-inch plate, angled at 60 degrees from a distance of up to 2,000 yards. And it was quickly realized that nothing in inventory, not even the new and supposedly top-of-the-line 120mm L1 cannon destined for the FV214 Conqueror, was up to this task, and so a development program for a whole new heavy gun was launched under Major General Stuart B. Rawlings, Director General of Artillery. Initially, he explored the idea of developing a 155mm gun to standardize with the USA, but he soon realized that even this would fall short of that most lofty goal, and so thoughts were given to something even larger still. Much back and forth ensued on how big this new gun should be and which type of round it should fire. On their later point, a Hesh round was eventually settled upon, but the matter of how big it should be remained unsolved, with a short list of two decreeing that it would either be 6.5 or 7.2 inches in size. The choice for Hesh rounds was the consequence of a change in philosophy within the British military over what constituted a kill. It was recognized that complete destruction of an enemy vehicle was not always necessary to render it inoperable. A mobility kill that rendered a tank functionally unusable was just as adequate as a true kill. This approach, termed disruption not destruction, led to the decision to employ a high-explosive squash head, Hesh round, as while this type had a lesser likelihood of completely obliterating an enemy tank, it was very good at rendering it inoperable. The size debate was eventually solved when Major General Rawlings decreed that a 6.5-inch wasn't destructive enough, testing showing that such a round could only be reliably depended on to score a kill when hitting bare plate armor, and so the 7.2-inch round was settled upon to be absolutely sure that whatever tank it did hit would be in no position to return the favor, even if it impacted in a less than ideal manner. Testing of this new arrangement went well, and so the cannon was formally accepted into service in December 1952, being given the designation Ordnance Quick Firing 183mm Tank L4 gun. It was, and still is, one of the largest and most powerful tank cannons ever produced. Now, we don't know exactly how many L4s were produced, as that detail has since been lost to time, but most historians believe somewhere in the region of a dozen or so were created. And speaking of things that we don't know, we're also unaware of how long the cannon truly is, as this detail doesn't survive in any documents, and for some reason, no one has thought to go and measure the exact length of the sole surviving example, not even its current custodians. So maybe they could do that, and we can update this. What we do know is that it is roughly 15 feet long, has a fully rifled bore, weighs 3.7 tons, and has a bore evacuator halfway down its length. Only Hesh rounds were ever developed for the L4, and they were absolutely immense, as we talked about earlier. Upon firing, the gun generated a whopping 86 tons of recoil force and boasted a recoil length of 2.25 feet. But at this point, you might be wondering, you've talked a lot about Hesh, Simon, but what exactly is a Hesh round? Well, you might recall it stands for High Explosive Squash Head, and it operates using a mechanism designed to maximize damage to heavily armored targets. Upon impact with an enemy vehicle, the plastic explosive-filled warhead squashes against the armor surface, spreading out to form a larger area of contact. The detonator then ignites the explosive, creating a shockwave that travels through the armor plate. This shockwave causes a section of the armor's inner surface to spall or break off, transforming it into a lethal shower of high-velocity fragments within the target vehicle. The resulting damage can incapacitate or destroy vital components, as well as kill or injure the crew, effectively rendering the vehicle inoperable. Hesh rounds are particularly adept at causing this disruption, not destruction effect, prioritizing functional incapacitation over complete obliteration of enemy tanks. The notable thing about Hesh rounds, however, is that their effectiveness doesn't decrease with distance. They will penetrate the same thickness of armor at whatever distance it happens to hit. This effectiveness was put to the test against a Conqueror and a Centurion, thoroughly demonstrating the round's enormous power. The 183mm Hesh round shattered the Conqueror's mantlet and blasted the turret off the Centurion with just 2 rounds. Hesh rounds can also serve as dual-use ammunition, effectively engaging enemy armor as well as targets like buildings, enemy defensive positions, or soft-skinned targets. So now that we know all about the FV4005's cannon, let's look at the development of the beast itself. The story of the FV4005's development begins with its more advanced sibling, the FV215, development of which began in 1950. This was intended to be the heavy tank of the British Army. No time, no expense spared. It utilized the FV200 chassis and so shared similarities with the FV214 Conqueror, but with its turret moved to the rear of the vehicle. This would have featured a full 360-degree traverse, but limited firing up because the recoil of the L4 would have literally flipped the tank if firing from the side. The problem with designs that spare no time or expense, however, is that, shockingly, they tend to be very expensive and very time-consuming to produce. And so, in November 1950, the War Office filed a requirement for a stopgap vehicle using the L4 cannon that could be produced very quickly, lest the Cold War get hot before the FV215 was completed. And thus, the FV4005 was born. The FV4005 was to be a lightly armored, self-propelled gun and would weigh approximately 50 tons. The design utilized existing production parts, allowing for potential production by December 1952. The vehicle, based on the FV4000 series Centurion with its original turret removed, underwent 2 stages of development. Stage 1 tested the gun and mount on the Centurion chassis, while Stage 2 represented the finalized design and production standard. Officially designated Heavy Anti-Tank SB No. 1, the FV4005 was to be the first new heavy gun tank of the British Army since World War II. Its name is also something of an oddity, because it also never received the traditional British C name. Think the Charioteer, Challenger 2, Conway. At least, it didn't officially. A December 1952 document pulled from the Vickers archive refers to them having manufactured equipment for mounting a 103mm gun on a so-called Centaur tank. So maybe this could have been its intended name. Now that's interesting, deviation aside. To create the prototype FV4005s, 3 Centurion hulls were taken from service and used as the basis for the design. Apart from changes such as the removal of the turret, the hulls were left largely unaltered. It was, put simply, just a Centurion with a really big gun just kind of stuck on top. So now that we have the development backgrounds of the FV4005, let's explore how its 2 different stages come together. The FV4005 Stage 1 takes its suffix from a 1951 report from the Ministry of Supply's Fighting Vehicle Division, which also gives us a fantastic summary of the vehicle's outline, stating that the FV4005 Stage 1, quote, embodies a concentric recoil system in a mounting in trunnions on an undercarriage, the whole of which rests on the existing turret race rings. No crew protection is provided, and one prototype only will be made to obtain experience of firing such a large gun from the Centurion hull. It is anticipated, although all-round traverse will be possible, firing will be confined to a limited angle forward on either side of the fore and aft line. Prototype should be completed by the 31st of December 1951. For the Stage 1, which was constructed as an initial test vehicle, an enclosed turret was omitted. Instead, a bespoke platform was installed over the original Centurion turret ring. This platform was an unenclosed solid floor without a basket. The L4 gun was then mounted on this platform in a fixed, rigid position and was not adjustable for elevation. Although the platform could traverse fully horizontally, firing was limited to a narrow arc at the front and rear of the vehicle. It was also equipped with a concentric recoil system built using a tube surrounding the breech end of the barrel. This provided a space-saving alternative to conventional recoil cylinders. As the platform had limited space, it only allowed for 2 crew members, a gunner and a loader. The gunner was seated on the left side of the gun, which had a well-padded seat with a backrest. Ammunition storage was provided behind the gunner on a large rack. The fixed elevation of the gun enabled the installation of a mechanical loading assist device to assist the loader with aligning the monstrously heavy ammunition with the breech. Do note, however, this was not an automatic loader as it lacked a rammer. The loader, by contrast, did not have a seat. The driver's position remained unchanged, located at the front right of the hull, where it would be on a normal Centurion. The only modifications made to the Centurion hull itself were a recoil spade and a folding travel lock. The recoil spade was positioned at the rear and served to transfer recoil forces from the chassis to the ground, reducing the strain on the suspension. It was lowered to the ground when the vehicle was in position, and during firing it dug into the ground to provide a backstop. The Stage 1/Scheme 1 underwent extensive firing trials, and although there were some issues with the concentric recoil system, the trials were generally successful. The development then continued to the Stage 2 vehicles. In the same Ministry of Supply report that we previously discussed, the Stage 2 Scheme 2 was described as the following. It embodies 2 conventional recoil systems with a hyper-pneumatic recuperator and an independent run-out control. Undercarriage similar to Stage 1 but of fabricated construction. A superstructure for crew protection will be provided, but weight considerations will preclude more than a limited degree of splinter protection. A sight is being designed in which the body is fixed with a relation to the gun mounting, and internal moving parts supply angle of sight, target elevation, and correction for trunnion tilt. The range scale is visible in the sight eyepiece. Scale designs have been prepared and details will be completed shortly. The prototype should be available by March 1952. Stage 2 was intended to be a pre-production model, and so several modifications were made to reflect this. The most significant change involved constructing an enclosed turret. Additionally, the loading assist was removed and the concentric recoil system was replaced by a hyper-pneumatic variant. The turret of the FV4005 was built from 0.55-inch thick steel and had a sloped face and a completely boxed rear end to protect the crew from small arms fire and shell splinters. Since the vehicle was designed to keep out the range of enemy AFVs, the armor did not need to be excessively thick, and the addition of the large gun meant that the chassis and engine could not handle any extra weight. The turret was split into 2 parts, a sloped face with a large faceplate angled at a very shallow angle, and a taller, box-like rear section with external structural ridges where the ammunition was stored against the walls. In total, the Stage 2 carried 12 rounds. The turret had 2 hatches on the roof and a large rear door that served as both crew access and for ammunition resupply via a winch and rail. In front of the roof hatches were 2 single periscopes installed in the turret roof. The turret crew consisted of 5 men rather than 4, as the loading assist of the Stage 1 was deleted on the Stage 2, and so 2 loaders were required, with one handling the charge and the other the projectile. As with its predecessor, the Stage 2 underwent multiple firing tests, and its hydropneumatic system performed without any notable issues. At the Ridsdale testing grounds in Northumberland, a total of 150 rounds were fired, and according to a 1955 AFV Development Liaison report from the Ministry of Supply, the Stage 2 proved satisfactory in terms of its overall performance. Now, you're no doubt thinking to yourself, well, if the Stage 2 ticked all of the boxes, how come it was only ever a prototype? And the answer to that is twofold. Firstly, the threat the FV4005 was designed to counter proved not to be quite as fearsome as first anticipated, and secondly, advances in anti-tank guided missiles, or ATGMs, made large cannons such as the L4 obsolete. Regarding the former point, it was primarily because there was a shift in tank design philosophy with the emergence of the main battle tank, or MBT concept. This concept aimed to combine the best attributes of heavy, medium, and light tanks into a single versatile platform that could fulfill multiple roles on the battlefield. The rise of the MBT concept led to the development of tanks with a more balanced combination of firepower, mobility, and protection. As a result, both the Soviet Union and other nations began to move away from heavy tanks like the IS-3, focusing instead on the production of more versatile and cost-effective MBTs, making the need for big-bore cannons to defeat those large beasts increasingly moot. The second reason was the rise of ATGMs. These missiles were highly effective against armored vehicles, with ranges and destructive capabilities that completely dwarfed that which had been possible with traditional cannons. Without ATGMs, there would still have been a need for the FV4005 to deal with a few IS-3s that were still produced despite evolving tank philosophies, but with them, the very idea of a big-bore tank killer was confined to the scrap heap of obsolescence. The British recognized this, and so they decided to cut their losses and terminate the FV4005 project, which formally got the axe in August 1957, ending the history of one of the most powerful tanks to ever leave the British drawing board. The three FV4005s produced had a varied fate following the project's cancellation. The Sol Stage 1 was sent to the Shoeburyness Proof and Experimental Establishment, where it had its L4 removed and it was returned to service as a normal Centurion. As for the Stage 2s, one was offered to the Royal Military College for Science, while the other Stage 2 was kept by the Fighting Vehicle Research and Development Establishment. Like the Stage 1 before them, both eventually had their turrets removed and the chassis were returned to service as normal Centurions. The former turret then disappeared altogether and was likely scrapped at an unknown date. The later turret eventually found its way to the Bovington Tank Museum, where it sat unloved and underappreciated for several years before they had the great idea of plonking it on a spare Centurion chassis, creating a near-perfect match for what the original Centurion would have looked like. This example survives to this day and remains available at Bovington for your viewing pleasure. And so is the story of the FV4005, an amazing piece of design born just too late to be useful. So let us close with a question. We know that the FV4005 was a failure. That much is irrefutable. But was it a bad tank? To what extent does it being obsolete before it went into production count against its merits? Should the designers have seen this change coming? And does their failure to do so write their design off as a complete boondoggle? Or given the fact that the FV4005 performed the task it was given perfectly, and that task just happened to be rapidly unneeded, do we still need to consider it a good tank? Just one with a little asterisk after the word good? Sadly, that question is not ours to answer. Today we're just giving you the facts to come up with your own opinion, not spoon feed you our own. So let us know what you think in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.